shouted.
You shouted.
I did.
I did the same thing with him as well.
Yeah.
And I've chosen just to blank the questions that I was asked. Hannah, you've been involved in a big campaign recently, and it's a sad campaign. It's a difficult campaign. Members of Parliament quite often get asked to get involved in bringing people back from abroad who have died. Because it happens, and it's something that almost all of us had experience of at one point. Now, you would think, would you not, that our Rolls-Royce civil service in the Foreign Office, as we're always told it's a Rolls-Royce civil service, will kick into action and will remove all the difficult decisions from the bereaved relatives and will ease things. And it's not always the case, and you want to make things better, don't you?
Yes, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, John. When you come to Parliament, as you well know, you have ideas and I suppose a vision about what you want to campaign on, what your issues are, but quite often that gets overtaken by the issues that your constituents bring. And so for me, I found myself in the very sad and unfortunate position that I've now got 2 constituency cases, both women, both have died, we think, at the hands of violent men, and both in suspicious circumstances abroad, one in Israel and one in Spain. And on both occasions, I have to say that, and I must preface my comments with, I have the highest regard for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office and for staff that work in foreign missions. I worked in a foreign mission myself for the Americans. I worked in the American consulate in Edinburgh. I know how difficult the job is, but it strikes me that the processes and the resources are not in place in the British Foreign Service to make sure that our consular services do what they should be doing in supporting families every step of the way. Now, in both of the cases, so Julie Pearson was killed in Israel she was beaten by her ex-partner, and we believe that led to her death. And in the case of Kirsty Maxwell, she fell over a balcony in Benidorm, and she was in a room that was not hers. And because of failings in the police investigation, we don't really understand all the circumstances. And that's what it comes down to, in large part, is the way the police have conducted themselves in those countries, but also that there has been a lack of focus and a lack of pressure, I feel, from the British government on really getting to the bottom of the issues.
Now, what did you want our Foreign Office to do that it has failed to do in those cases?
So in both of those cases, what we wanted and what we've been able to reflect on is poor communication. So first and foremost, in the case of Kirsty's situation, there was a confused call from the Spanish police to her husband. Her husband thought it was a prank call. He was very distressed then and tried to unravel things and get the information. He arrived in country, got very little support. In the case of Julie Pearson, it was actually one of her friends that alerted her family, and it was her family that told the local consulate of Julie's death. And so in both of those cases, it was just... And what came out of the debate was that lots of members across the chamber had had a similar experience that their constituents.
Now, you mentioned working for the Americans under these circumstances because you worked in an American mission. What did the Americans do that was better than we do?
Yeah, really interesting question. And again, my experience is only limited to the consulate in Edinburgh and the embassy in London. But what the processes that the American State Department have is that the head of mission has to be the person that contacts the family. They do not allow the local police to contact families, so they have to contact the family.
How did they
directly.
stop the local police if the local police choose to do it?
Well, my understanding of it is that it's an agreement that they have that is long-standing. And so those protocols are written down, they're consular protocols, and they work very closely with the local police, and the head of mission has to coordinate all of that. So on a number of occasions I sat in with the principal officer in the consulate when she was phoning families so that there was somebody with her present. And they coordinate things, they make sure they communicate with the family, and that's very different from the experiences that I've had of my 2 constituents. It's also things like Kirsty's family turned up in Spain, obviously needed a lawyer because it's a different jurisdiction, and they got handed a handwritten bit of paper with a list of English-speaking lawyers. No information or advice on whether of them have any experience on homicide, for example. And the first lawyer that picked up the phone is the lawyer they've ended up with. Now, it so happens, he's doing his very best, but that's a really, I think, unacceptable position for us to be in.
Well, I'm quite surprised you're saying that you get the highest regard, because sounds to me like it's just a complete mess in a lot of the embassies. So it's kind of you to say you've got the highest regard. I had in my constituency the brother of one of those guys. You probably remember the story. They were they were security officers who protected ships
Yes.
from mercenaries. And I'll abbreviate the story, but the ship broke down. It was a Panama-based ship. It wasn't well maintained. Broke down. These guys were tasked with the job of protecting the cargo from pirates. That was what they were there to do. Their ship broke down, drifted into Indian waters. Once in Indian waters, they were arrested. There were guns on the ship. They languished for a while in some cells in India. Clearly, the police were waiting for a bribe, it transpires. They went to court. They were released with no case to answer. They went then to the British Embassy to ask for temporary travel documents to leave the country, and were told they couldn't because the police had their passports. The very police who detained them under suspiciously dodgy circumstances. The embassy would not give them temporary passports. They were rearrested as a result by the police and ended up spending almost 2 years in prison, given almost no assistance at all by the Foreign Office. So,
It's outrageous.
It's outrageous. They ended up selling their houses to pay for their legal costs. It was all incredibly dodgy in India, and they got very little support. And that one fatal mistake, apart from anything else, of not giving them temporary travel documents, resulted in almost 2 years of incarceration, because, of course, a temporary travel document could have got them out of the country and out of the clutches of the Indian police. So my experience as a Member of Parliament handling some of these cases was that actually our diplomatic missions are very inconsistent. There are some terrific ones and there are some terrible ones, but it is not the Rolls-Royce service that we're led to believe.
No, I think you're absolutely correct. And I think when I say I have the highest regard, what I mean is for the role, because it is a very, very difficult job to do. But what seems to me to be the case is that there are not proper or as good, there are not the Rolls-Royce processes in place, as you say, that they claim to have in place, and there certainly is not the resources in place.
So we're going to take a break in a moment, but before we leave this subject, in a nutshell, what do you want to change? What's your top 3 asks?
Top 3 asks is a full-scale review of the consular service and the services that it offers and the range of services across different missions and countries. Much better guidance for families in terms of communication, because if you look on the website for the Foreign Commonwealth Office, it's a patchy. Oh, it might be this person that tells you, it might be that person, and proper buy-in and resource from government, not just to fund the FCO and the Foreign Commonwealth Office, but also to review those processes and take an active part in the all-party group that I'll be starting. And to be fair to the Minister, Harriet Baldwin, she actually gave a very positive response to that part of things.
Good.
Less so positive in other regards.
Because you're an SNP Member of Parliament, but this presumably should be an all-party thing, because every Member of Parliament surely wants the very best for constituents who are dealing with the most terrible of circumstances and trying to get loved ones home. It shouldn't be a party political issue, should it?
No, absolutely not. And I made that very clear in the debate. And to be fair, she commended me on that tone. I tried to make it constructive and positive. And we had members from across all parties intervening, telling stories of their constituents and saying they wanted to take an active part in the all-party group. And I actually think that is how we're going to take it forward and get proper progress.
Well, it's just coming up to 6:45, and we'll be back with Hannah Bardell after this short break. You're listening to John Nicholson on Talk Radio.